Hey everybody, it's Jeff from Blockchip. Today I'm going to talk about our new cash discounting system. We've worked on a lot of things over the last couple of weeks, even during COVID, and I'm going to show you a couple of those things over the coming weeks, but today I'm just going to focus on probably what's the biggest thing that we've done, which is the new cash discounting system. So I'm going to approach this from a developer perspective, but just to kind of talk about what cash discounting is briefly, cash discounting is really an industry euphemism for surcharging. Meaning that that consumers are going to get a surcharge to cover the credit card processing fees tacked onto their bills, and then if they pay with something for which that's not allowed, which is cash or debit cards, really in our case, then we would make sure that charge is not applied. So what Blockchip does is it deals with the rules around when you're allowed to do these surcharges and when you're not allowed to do it. So that you sort of stay out of trouble if you as a merchant want to do it. The reason a merchant might want to do this is obviously that it lowers their costs. They end up not really paying the processing fees themselves. It's passed on to the consumers directly. And then for ISVs, the reason that ISV or a partner might want to encourage a merchant to do this is that if they're not paying for it out of their own pocket, they tend to be less price sensitive. So typically, the processing margins are higher on cash discount merchants. But it is something that should be approached carefully because there are rules, both from a technical standpoint that we handle for you and from a signage and sort of messaging standpoint. But if you, as an engineer or developer, if you've been tasked with implementing this, the first thing that you would do is look at this new button here we have in the developer portal. So if you have a test merchant account, you're going to see this new button called Test Settings. Live merchants will not see this. If you click on this, you're going to see a bunch of settings that merchants normally would not be able to adjust themselves for what I think are obvious reasons, because some of these things are more security or underwriting related. In the case of cash discounting, there's this new surcharge cash discount enabled section. You hit yes here. Then you have the option to set the pricing that you're going to use for testing purposes so that you have some kind of numbers coming back. Now, bear in mind that cash discounting and surcharging works with flat rate pricing. So and with per transaction fees, but if you set an interchange plus price, it's not going to work because we can't reliably predict in real time what the interchange rate for a transaction is going to be. There are ways of getting there, but it's actually quite difficult to do that correctly, at least at this stage. So the reason that we allow you to set interchange plus pricing is just that your system you have the ability as a developer to test that your system handles this sort of unexpected condition correctly. So if you set a price here, and then run a cash discount transaction, you'll get an error. You should know what that error is. You should expect it to happen, and then so your system doesn't get freaked out by it. But in most cases, what I do is I usually set the flat rate pricing to be 3.5% and 30 cents. Although this varies depending on lots of factors. I'm the CTO. I don't get into the business conversation, so pricing is obviously a very complicated and conversation in payments. So once you've set this correctly, once you have this set up, you can now start running cash discount transactions. So I am going to do all the demonstrations today using the Blockchip command line interface. Before I do that, I want to point out that we recently redesigned our documentation system. So this is the new docs.blockchip.com. I am going to be talking about the shell or CLI way of accessing Blockchip. So all my examples will be based on this type of interface. But you can see all the programming languages up here that we have bindings for. So everything that I'm telling you, you can also do in any of these languages as well. So let's start with just a basic transaction. So I've got a terminal activated over here. I'm going to do a quick ping transaction to make sure that I can talk to my terminal. It's usually how I start any kind of development session with a terminal, just to make sure that it's there. I get a success true. I know the terminal is online and I can talk to it. So that means everything is set up correctly. Next, I'm going to run just a basic charge transaction. We're not going to worry about cash discount right now. We're going to do one of these. We're going to do the before picture, and then we'll do the after picture in a second. So I'll run this transaction for $25. And this is sort of the minimal invocation. I'll hit that, my terminal wakes up, I will put a card in, we'll do contact DMV, and the transaction is approved. Now, you can see, for those of you who've worked Blockchip before, one of the things that we return in the response is this receipt suggestions block. Sometimes when you work with other processors, it can be a little bit of a cat and mouse game to know what the receipt requirements are. In some cases, they're documented at different places. In some cases, they don't really tell you what they are completely until you get kind of halfway through the certification process. In our case, we just put them in this receipt suggestions block. So as a developer, if you put everything that comes down in this block on the receipt, you're going to be fine. You'll be PCI compliant. You'll be EMV compliant as far as receipts go. The cash discounting factors into this because you have to show this stuff on the receipt. So we've added these two new fields here, surcharge and cash discount. So my recommendation to most developers is that when these are 0, don't show them. And when they're non-zero, you should show them. And you should show them in this order, surcharge and cash discount. So now let's run this same transaction, but let's do it in surcharge only mode. We support 3 modes of doing cash discounting and surcharging. The first mode that I'm going to show you means that if the transaction and the card type are eligible for surcharging, we add a surcharge. If they're not, we just run it like a normal transaction. So a debit card holder would not even know it happened, right? The next mode is going to be surcharging with cash discounting. What that means is that we always add a surcharge to the receipt, to the transaction, but if it is a debit card, we take that off and show it as a discount on the receipt. But I'll start with the surcharge only mode first. For CLI developers, all you would do is just add a surcharge flag here. The reason that we ask developers to add these flags instead of just have it set up in the merchant profile is because there are receipt handling requirements here. You've got to deal with these 2 fields. So we don't want to have these fields start coming down with values in them without you as the developer having planned for that and coded for that. It's not a lot of work, but imagine if someone could just go into a merchant profile in Blockchip, turn these things on, and your POS system was never coded to deal with it. You could get into some weird situations where transactions could be changing and there wouldn't be any receipt documenting what had happened. And so by forcing you to pass in these flags, it's just a way of confirming as a developer what your intent is and that you've planned for this to happen. So with that caveat out of the way, let's run our first surcharge transaction. We'll do this with a conventional credit card, so not a debit card. So we'll run that. It's approved, it returns, and you can see now I have a surcharge in my receipt block. Also, if I look at authorized amount, you can see it's gone up from $25 by $1.18. So everything is good. Let's see what happens if I do the same thing, but I use a debit card instead. So I'll run the exact same transaction again, but I'll put a debit card in a slot instead of a credit card. And I will enter a PIN because it's a debit card. And here comes the response, and you can see surcharge in this case is 0, and authorized amount is $25. Exactly what we expected. So that's how pure surcharging works. The next mode I think is the most common. It's the best balance between the trade-offs, the various approaches, which is that you do surcharge plus cash discounting. What this means is that in the event of a debit card, basically it means that a surcharge is added to all transactions no matter what, but if someone presents a debit card, we take the surcharge off, and we show that on the receipt as a discount. So that's how this works. Let's try this. We're going to have to change the amount slightly so that our duplicate filter does not get flagged. We consider a transaction a duplicate if the same terminal, same amount, and same card were presented within 2 minutes of each other. All right, so let's do this. We'll start with a credit card, so you can see what this looks like with a credit card. All right, our response has come back, and you can see we see a surcharge. Cash discount is 0 because this is a credit card, doesn't get a cash discount. So for pure credit cards, this mode exactly the same behavior as the previous mode. Where this method really shines is when we add a debit card. So let's run the same transaction again. We're going to present a debit card this time. I have to enter a PIN. And here comes the response. You can see surcharge 118, cash discount 118. They offset each other. And up here for authorized amount, exactly the same amount that we requested initially, 2501. So this is how surcharge plus cash discount mode works. This is the mode I recommend most of you use. It can be hard payments partly by through negligence and partly through design, is confusing, right? So there's a lot of things that happen in payments that are hard for people to wrap their head around. And so if you have a series of meetings at your company about how you want to do this, and it seems like the result of those meetings is that no one really understands it, or it's inconclusive, just do this. Just do surcharge plus cash discount, and this will ensure that you kind of get the best of both worlds, right? The next method is one I want you to use very, very carefully. This next method is what we call pure or true cash discount mode. This assumes that the merchant has built the transaction fees into their merchandise pricing, which it almost never happens, but it could happen, right? And so in this mode, if a credit card is presented, it does nothing, treats it as a normal transaction. If a debit card is presented, a cash discount is applied to the transaction, which reduces the total, which merchants normally don't want. If a merchant does want to do this, probably the most consumer-friendly way, this is the way to go, but it's not practical for most merchants to reprice everything to account for this. But some will. So let me show you what a transaction looks like with cash discounting. I'm going to change the amount slightly again to account for the duplicate filter, and I'm going to run a transaction. This time I'm going to present a credit card, not a debit card. So we can see what that scenario looks like. And there it is. You can see no surcharge, no cash discount. Authorized amount is exactly the same as we passed in. So that's good. Right? So you'll notice that we used a credit card and the amount of the transaction did not go up because we assume that the requested amount has the fees sort of baked into it. All right, let's try the same thing again, but let's do it with a debit card. So I will put the debit card in. I'll enter a PIN because it's a debit card. And now you can see I have a cash discount, but no surcharge, and the authorized amount is less than the amount we requested when we initially ran the transaction. So that's the difference between the three systems. So that's cash discounting. There's more that I could go into. I will say that when a merchant signs up for cash discounting, they need signage. We do have that for them. So just make sure that when a merchant goes live with cash discounting, that especially before we ship their terminal order, that we know about that, and we'll throw the signage for that merchant in the terminal order in the same shipment, so it's all good to go. That's about it. If there are any questions about how cash discounting works, best place to go would be the docs. You can see that we have a whole section here in our documentation section with some details about a lot of the stuff that I've already talked about how cash discounting works. So this is an option if you need it. We've gone through a lot of trouble at Blockship to make sure that we don't impose a specific approach to this on you, that you can do it in kind of 3 different ways and sort of adapt it to what the merchants sort of want and feel comfortable with. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on the Lab Series.